Settle into your pillows, let your breathing slow, and prepare to drift into the timeless waters of ancient legend. Tonight, we journey beyond the ordinary world, past the threshold of recorded history, into the realm where philosophy meets mythology, where sunken continents whisper their secrets through the gentle currents of imagination. This is the complete story of Atlantis, told not as a mystery to be solved, but as a voyage through time itself, a gentle exploration that will carry you softly into the depths of sleep. The story begins not beneath the waves, but in the sunlit marble halls of ancient Athens around 360 BC. Picture those gleaming white columns rising against the impossibly blue Mediterranean sky, the shadows lengthening across the Academy's courtyard as afternoon surrenders to evening. Here, in this philosophical sanctuary, founded by one of history's greatest minds, Plato crafted two dialogues that would ripple through human consciousness for more than 23 centuries. The Timaeus and the Critias, these twin texts emerging from his pen like twin islands from a primordial sea, contained within their philosophical frameworks a tale so compelling, so vividly detailed, that people would spend millennia searching for physical proof of what may have been intended as pure allegory. Plato was not merely a storyteller, though his narrative gifts were considerable. He was a philosopher-teacher seeking to illuminate profound truths about human nature, political systems, and the rise and fall of civilizations. Born into an aristocratic Athenian family around 428 BC, he had witnessed firsthand the catastrophic consequences of the Peloponnesian War, the moral corruption that accompanied Athens' transformation from defender of Greek freedom to aggressive imperial power. The city that had once stood as a beacon of justice and wisdom had descended into factional violence, opportunistic politics, and ultimately defeat. These experiences shaped everything Plato wrote, infusing his works with urgent questions about what makes a society virtuous, what causes civilizations to decline, and whether human beings could create political systems resistant to corruption. The Atlantis narrative emerges within this philosophical context, presented not as historical fact demanding belief, but as a teaching tool wrapped in the seductive clothing of adventure and grandeur. Plato introduces the story through a carefully constructed chain of testimony designed to lend verisimilitude while simultaneously hinting at the tale's allegorical nature. The dialogue features Critias, supposedly Plato's great-grandfather, recounting a story passed down through his family from the legendary Athenian lawgiver Solon, who had traveled to Egypt around 590 BC. There, in the ancient city of Sais, Egyptian priests had revealed to Solon records of events occurring 9,000 years before their own time, making the story approximately 9,500 BC from Plato's perspective, or roughly 11,500 years before our present day. The priests, according to Plato's account, had chided Solon, telling him that Greeks possessed no antiquity of history and no history of antiquity. The Egyptians, by contrast, claimed temple archives containing records spanning millennia, preserving knowledge of civilizations and catastrophes that the Greeks had forgotten. Among these records lay the tale of Atlantis, a powerful island nation that had once threatened the entire Mediterranean world before vanishing beneath the waves in a single day and night of catastrophic destruction. Let your breathing deepen as we move into the heart of the tale, into Plato's description of this magnificent lost civilization. The island of Atlantis, he tells us, lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the ancient name for the Strait of Gibraltar, positioned in the Atlantic Ocean, in waters that became impassable after the island's destruction due to shallow mud left by the catastrophe. This geographical placement removed Atlantis from the familiar Mediterranean world, situating it at the very edge of the known, in that liminal space where reality blurs into imagination. Plato describes Atlantis as larger than Libya and Asia combined, a staggering claim that immediately signals we have left the realm of ordinary geography and entered a landscape of symbolic meaning. The physical structure of the island itself followed a pattern of mesmerizing regularity. Concentric rings of land and water alternated around a central island, as if some divine geometer had used an immense compass to inscribe perfect circles upon the Earth. The central island measured approximately 50 stadia in diameter, roughly 5.7 miles, and these concentric circles were connected by tunnels large enough for ships to pass through, creating an intricate system of harbors and waterways that demonstrated engineering prowess of the highest order. The outermost ring of water served as a massive harbor capable of accommodating vast fleets of triremes and merchant vessels. Massive walls surrounded each ring of land, and here Plato's description becomes particularly vivid, particularly dreamlike in its emphasis on precious metals and spectacular visual effects. The outer wall was covered in brass, gleaming dully in the sun. The middle wall was coated in tin, its surface reflecting light with a different quality, a different color. And the innermost wall, the one protecting the most sacred spaces of the city, gleamed with orichalcum, a mysterious metal that Plato describes as second in value only to gold. Imagine these metallic surfaces catching the changing light throughout the day, creating a dazzling spectacle visible from great distances at sea, a beacon announcing the presence of an extraordinary civilization. At the heart of the city stood the royal palace and the temple of Poseidon, the patron deity of Atlantis. This temple measured 600 feet in length, 300 feet in width, proportionally tall, constructed entirely of silver, except for its golden pinnacles that caught the first and last light of each day. Inside, rising nearly to the ceiling, stood a colossal gold statue of Poseidon driving 6 winged horses, a testament to the Atlanteans' wealth and artistic achievement. The temple grounds contained golden statues of the 10 original Atlantean kings and their wives, creating a pantheon of dynastic power frozen in precious metal, watching over their descendants with eternal golden eyes. The governmental system of Atlantis, as Plato describes it, combined elements of monarchy, aristocracy, and federalism in a unique arrangement. 10 kings ruled different regions of the island and its external territories, all descendants of Atlas, the firstborn son of Poseidon. These rulers gathered every 5th and 6th year, alternately in the temple of Poseidon, to deliberate on matters of common interest and to judge any infractions of their sacred laws, which were inscribed on a pillar of orichalcum within the temple. Picture these gatherings: the 10 kings arriving from their respective domains, their ships entering the concentric harbors, processing through the magnificent city to the temple, where the golden statue of their divine ancestor watched their proceedings. The military capabilities of Atlantis reflected the island's vast resources and population. Plato provides specific, almost bureaucratic numbers that lend a strange precision to his account. The island could field 60,000 leaders of soldiers, 120,000 hoplites, 180,000 archers, 180,000 slingers, 300,000 stone shooters and javelin men, 240,000 horsemen, and 60,000 chariots. The naval forces included 1,200 ships, each carrying 200 men. These figures suggest a total military force exceeding 1 million men, supported by a civilian population that must have numbered in the tens of millions. Such numbers dwarf anything that existed in Plato's time, or indeed in the Bronze Age periods that some have connected to the Atlantis legend. Another hint that we are dealing with something other than straightforward historical reportage. The economic foundation of this military machine rested on the island's extraordinary natural abundance. The fertile plains produced 2 harvests annually, watered by winter rains and summer irrigation from an elaborate canal system. The main canal, Plato tells us, with that same peculiar precision, was 300 feet wide, 100 feet deep, and 1,125 miles long, connecting the capital to the sea, while smaller channels created a grid pattern across the rectangular plain, facilitating both irrigation and transportation. This agricultural productivity supported not only the massive population, but also extensive trade networks that brought exotic goods from across the known world. The technological achievements of Atlantis extended beyond agriculture and architecture. Plato describes sophisticated engineering projects, including the excavation of harbors, the construction of bridges spanning the water rings, and the creation of underground passages for ships. The Atlanteans possessed advanced metallurgy, working not only with conventional metals, but also with the mysterious orichalcum, which they mined from the earth in many parts of the island. They had access to both hot and cold springs, using these water sources for bathing and for irrigating their gardens and groves. They constructed elaborate facilities for athletics and equestrian activities, recognizing the importance of physical culture alongside their technological and economic achievements. Yet beneath this veneer of prosperity and power, Plato weaves a narrative of moral decline that serves as the philosophical core of his account. Initially, the Atlanteans embodied virtue and wisdom, their divine heritage from Poseidon manifesting in just governance and noble character. However, as generations passed and the divine element in their nature became diluted through intermarriage with mortals, their character gradually deteriorated. They became consumed with material wealth, political ambition, and imperial expansion. This transformation from virtue to corruption represents the central allegorical message of Plato's narrative. The early Atlanteans, like the ideal citizens of Plato's Republic, possessed the cardinal virtues of wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. Their society functioned harmoniously because each individual fulfilled their proper role according to their nature and abilities. The later Atlanteans, by contrast, exemplified the dangers of unchecked democracy and material excess that Plato observed in contemporary Athens. They grew proud and arrogant, losing sight of the wisdom that had made them great, forgetting that true virtue lies not in accumulating wealth and power, but in pursuing justice and wisdom for their own sake. The timeline Plato establishes for these events places the Atlantis story approximately 9,600 years before his own era, around 9,500 BC. This dating positions the narrative in the immediate aftermath of the last ice age, a period when sea levels were indeed rising dramatically, and coastal civilizations might have faced catastrophic flooding. However, the 9,000-year gap also conveniently places the events beyond the reach of any contemporary historical verification, lending the account an air of ancient authenticity while preventing factual challenges. It is the perfect distance in time for a teaching tale, far enough to be safely unverifiable, close enough to human experience to carry emotional weight. The geographical location beyond the Pillars of Hercules similarly serves multiple narrative purposes. This placement removes Atlantis from the familiar Mediterranean world while positioning it as a genuine threat to the civilizations Plato's audience knew. The Atlantic Ocean represented the edge of the known world in classical times, a realm of mystery where extraordinary civilizations might plausibly have existed. The subsequent impossibility of those waters due to mudshells provides a convenient explanation for why no contemporary explorers had rediscovered the lost continent, why the physical evidence remained forever out of reach. The climax of the Atlantis story comes with the Great War between this powerful island empire and ancient Athens. According to Plato's narrative, Atlantis had not been content with its own magnificent island, but had embarked on a campaign of imperial conquest, subjugating Libya as far as Egypt and Europe as far as Tyrrhenia. The mighty Atlantean military machine, with its million-plus soldiers and 1,200 warships, moved against the civilizations within the Pillars of Hercules, threatening to enslave the entire known world. At this moment of supreme crisis, ancient Athens stood alone as the defender of freedom. Where other Greek states fell away or were conquered, Athens refused to submit, despite being vastly outnumbered. The Athenian warriors, embodying the virtues of the ideal state that Plato describes in the Republic, defeated the Atlantean invaders in a series of battles that pushed them back toward their island homeland. This military triumph represented not merely superior tactics or numbers, but the victory of virtue over corruption, justice over tyranny, wisdom over arrogance. But even as Athens celebrated its victory, the gods prepared their final judgment on Atlantis. Violent earthquakes shook the earth. The seas rose in fury, and in the space of a single day and night, a catastrophe of unimaginable magnitude unfolded. The entire island of Atlantis, with its concentric rings of land and water, its gleaming metallic walls, its golden temple and silver palace, Its millions of inhabitants and their accumulated treasures of millennia sank beneath the waves. The Atlantean warriors who had set out to conquer the world never returned home, for there was no home to return to. The Athenian defenders who had saved Greek civilization were swallowed by the same catastrophe, leaving no survivors to tell the tale. Only the Egyptian priests, safe in their Nile-protected land, where rain and floods operated differently, preserved the memory of these events in their temple archives. And there, the story lay dormant for thousands of years until Solon's visit brought it back to the Greek world, eventually reaching Plato, who shaped it into its enduring literary form. The question of Plato's intent in creating the Atlantis narrative has generated scholarly debate for centuries. Several factors suggest that Plato conceived Atlantis primarily as a philosophical allegory rather than historical fact. The account appears exclusively in Plato's works, with no corroborating evidence from other ancient sources who would have had access to the same Egyptian records. The detailed numerical specifications, from military forces to architectural dimensions, display the systematic precision characteristic of Plato's theoretical constructions, rather than the approximate estimates typical of historical accounts. Furthermore, the Atlantis story serves specific philosophical and political purposes within the broader context of Plato's work. The contrast between virtuous ancient Athens and corrupt Atlantis mirrors the distinction between the ideal state described in the Republic and the degenerate democracies Plato criticized in contemporary Greece. The cyclical rise and fall of civilizations reflected Plato's theories about political change and the inevitable corruption of even the best-ordered states over time. The pedagogical function of the Atlantis narrative also supports its allegorical interpretation. Plato frequently employed myths and stories to illustrate abstract philosophical concepts, making complex ideas accessible through concrete imagery. The tale of Atlantis provides a vivid example of how material prosperity and military power, divorced from virtue and wisdom, inevitably lead to moral corruption and ultimate destruction. This lesson carried particular relevance for Plato's contemporaries, who had witnessed Athens' transformation from the defender of Greek freedom against Persian invasion to an aggressive imperial power whose overreach had led to defeat in the Peloponnesian War. The specific details of Atlantean society often mirror and critique aspects of Athenian civilization during its imperial period: the extensive naval forces, the tribute-paying subject territories, the magnificent public buildings funded by imperial wealth, and the gradual erosion of traditional values all reflected patterns that Plato's audience would have recognized from their own recent history. The catastrophic end of Atlantis served as a warning about the potential consequences of imperial hubris and moral decline, a warning that resonated with particular force in the aftermath of Athens' defeat and the dissolution of its empire. Yet the possibility remains that Plato drew inspiration from actual historical events or civilizations, even while crafting a primarily allegorical narrative. The Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BC had witnessed the sudden disappearance of several advanced civilizations, including the Mycenaean Greeks and the Hittite Empire. Memories of these catastrophes might have survived in oral traditions, providing a historical foundation for Plato's fictional elaboration. The Thera volcanic eruption around 1600 BC created tsunamis that devastated coastal areas throughout the eastern Mediterranean and contributed to the decline of Minoan civilization, offering another potential historical precedent for catastrophic civilizational destruction. The immediate aftermath of Plato's death in 347 BC marked the beginning of a complex intellectual legacy regarding his Atlantis narrative. Within the halls of the Academy, Plato's students grappled with the philosophical and historical implications of their master's account. None proved more influential in shaping subsequent interpretations than Aristotle, whose categorical dismissal of Atlantis as historical fact would echo through centuries of scholarly discourse. Aristotle's famous declaration that the man who dreamed it up made it vanish represented more than casual skepticism. It reflected a fundamental disagreement about the proper relationship between philosophical instruction and factual accuracy. The philosophical context surrounding Aristotle's rejection reveals deeper tensions within the Academy itself. Where Plato employed myth and allegory as vehicles for abstract truths, Aristotle increasingly favored direct logical argument and empirical observation. The Atlantis narrative, with its precise numerical details and elaborate geographical descriptions, presented exactly the kind of fictional framework disguised as historical fact that Aristotle found methodologically problematic. His criticism targeted not merely the content of the story, but Plato's entire approach to philosophical pedagogy. Other immediate disciples of Plato adopted more nuanced positions. Crantor of Soli, who studied directly under Xenocrates in the early 3rd century BC, represented the first known attempt to defend the historical authenticity of the Atlantis account. His commentary on the Timaeus, fragments of which survive in later Neoplatonic sources, argued that Plato had indeed based his narrative on genuine Egyptian records. Crantor claimed to have verified the existence of these records during his own travels, though the specific nature of his evidence remains unclear from surviving fragments. The absence of Atlantis references in contemporary historical works presents one of the most compelling arguments for Aristotle's position. Herodotus, writing his histories in the mid-5th century BC, demonstrated exhaustive curiosity about distant lands and ancient civilizations. His accounts encompass regions from Scythia to Ethiopia, incorporating local traditions, religious practices, and historical memories spanning centuries. Yet nowhere in his comprehensive survey of the Mediterranean world and its periphery does Herodotus mention any tradition resembling the Atlantis story, despite his documented fascination with Egyptian wisdom and historical records. Similarly, Thucydides, whose history of the Peloponnesian War established new standards for historical accuracy and source criticism, makes no reference to any ancient Athenian victory over a Western maritime empire. Given Thucydides' meticulous attention to Athenian historical traditions and his pride in documenting the city's past achievements, this omission carries particular weight. His account of early Greek history, though brief, includes references to various ancient conflicts and migrations that would have provided natural context for mentioning the Atlantis War if such traditions had existed. The geographic writings of Strabo, composed during the early Roman Empire, provide perhaps the most systematic ancient critique of the Atlantis narrative. Writing around the time of Augustus, Strabo possessed access to extensive geographical literature from the Hellenistic period, including works by explorers who had ventured beyond the Pillars of Hercules into the Atlantic Ocean. His dismissal of Atlantis as Plato's invention carried the weight of comprehensive geographical knowledge unavailable to earlier critics. Strabo's analysis focused particularly on the practical impossibilities of Plato's geographical claims. The assertion that Atlantis had been larger than Libya and Asia combined struck him as fundamentally incompatible with what Hellenistic explorers had discovered about the Atlantic Ocean's extent and character. Furthermore, Strabo noted that Plato's claim about impassable mudholes preventing later exploration contradicted the experiences of contemporary navigators who had successfully sailed Atlantic waters. The Roman historical tradition similarly ignored the Atlantis narrative, despite extensive engagement with Greek philosophical and historical sources. Livy's monumental work incorporated numerous Greek historical traditions and legends, yet makes no reference to Atlantis, despite covering periods when such a story might have provided useful comparative material. Tacitus, renowned for his critical approach to sources and his interest in the relationship between geography and political power, likewise omits any mention of the lost civilization. This pattern of omission becomes particularly significant when contrasted with the Roman treatment of other Platonic ideas. Roman intellectuals readily adopted and adapted Plato's political theories, educational philosophy, and metaphysical concepts. Yet the Atlantis narrative failed to gain traction in Roman historical or geographical literature, suggesting that educated Romans recognized its fictional character, even when they embraced other aspects of Platonic thought. The rise of Neoplatonism during late antiquity marked a dramatic shift in the reception of the Atlantis narrative, beginning with Plotinus in the 3rd century AD and reaching full development under Proclus in the 5th century. Neoplatonic philosophers approached Plato's works with a fundamentally different interpretive framework than their classical predecessors. Rather than viewing the dialogues primarily as philosophical arguments or historical accounts, They understood them as complex allegorical systems encoding profound metaphysical truths. Proclus, writing his extensive commentary on the Timaeus around 440 AD, devoted considerable attention to defending both the historical accuracy and allegorical significance of the Atlantis account. His approach reflected the Neoplatonic conviction that Plato's writings operated simultaneously on multiple levels of meaning. According to Proclus, the surface narrative of Atlantis described actual historical events, while the deeper allegorical structure revealed truths about the cosmic order and the soul's relationship to material existence. More significantly, Proclus developed sophisticated allegorical interpretations that transformed the Atlantis narrative into a cosmic drama. In his reading, the conflict between Athens and Atlantis represented the eternal struggle between intellectual and material principles within both the cosmos and the individual soul. Ancient Athens embodied the philosophical life oriented toward eternal truths, while Atlantis symbolized the material world's seductive power and ultimate instability. The destruction of Atlantis thus illustrated the inevitable fate of any civilization that prioritized material prosperity over spiritual wisdom. These allegorical interpretations allowed Neoplatonic philosophers to embrace the Atlantis narrative without confronting the historical and geographical difficulties that had troubled earlier critics. By locating the story's primary significance in its symbolic rather than literal content, they could simultaneously affirm its truth and acknowledge its apparent incompatibility with known historical facts. The encounter between the Atlantis narrative and early Christian thought produced complex and varied responses that reflected broader tensions between classical learning and biblical authority. Early Christian writers faced the challenge of integrating Greek philosophical wisdom with revealed truth, while maintaining the primacy of scriptural chronology and historical framework. The Atlantis story presented particular difficulties because its ancient dating appeared to conflict with biblical accounts of human history and divine providence. Clement of Alexandria, writing around 200 AD, demonstrated the sophisticated approach that characterized Alexandrian Christian scholarship. Rather than rejecting the Atlantis narrative outright, Clement sought to harmonize it with Christian historical understanding through careful chronological analysis. He argued that the Egyptian dating systems underlying Plato's account suffered from systematic errors that made ancient events appear far more remote than they actually were. By adjusting these chronologies to align with biblical timelines, Clement suggested that the Atlantis story might refer to events occurring within the framework of sacred history. Augustine of Hippo adopted a more skeptical stance that reflected his broader concerns about the relationship between classical learning and Christian faith. In his City of God, Augustine acknowledged the philosophical value of Platonic thought while maintaining critical distance from specific historical claims that lacked scriptural support. His treatment of Atlantis exemplified this balanced approach, recognizing the story's allegorical potential while expressing doubt about its literal accuracy. The chronological problems posed by the Atlantis narrative became increasingly acute as Christian scholars developed more systematic approaches to universal history. The traditional dating of Atlantis to approximately 9,500 BC created obvious conflicts with biblical chronologies that placed human creation only a few millennia before the Christian era. Some Christian writers attempted to resolve this difficulty by arguing that Plato had misunderstood the Egyptian chronological systems, while others suggested that the story referred to antediluvian civilizations mentioned obliquely in Genesis. Eastern Christian writers, particularly those working within the Byzantine tradition, often proved more receptive to the Atlantis narrative than their Western counterparts. The Byzantine scholarly tradition maintained closer continuity with classical Greek learning and showed greater willingness to integrate non-biblical historical traditions into comprehensive historical frameworks. Some Byzantine chronographers attempted to incorporate the Atlantis story into their universal histories by identifying it with various biblical or post-biblical events. The collapse of classical learning institutions across Western Europe during the 5th and 6th centuries created an intellectual vacuum that profoundly affected the transmission of Platonic texts. As barbarian invasions disrupted trade networks and urban centers, the elaborate manuscript copying operations that had sustained classical literature for centuries began to disintegrate. Monastic scriptoriums, while preserving essential Christian texts, operated with severely limited resources and necessarily selective copying priorities. In this environment of intellectual triage, the complete works of Plato, including the dialogues containing the Atlantis narrative, effectively vanished from Western European libraries. The Carolingian Renaissance of the 8th and 9th centuries, despite its significant achievements in preserving and copying classical texts, failed to recover the complete Platonic corpus. Charlemagne's scholars, working primarily from Latin sources, had access to only limited portions of Plato's work through intermediary sources like Cicero's translations and Augustinian commentaries. The Timaeus existed in partial Latin translation through Chalcidius's 4th century version, but this translation ended abruptly at the point where Plato begins his detailed description of Atlantis, leaving medieval readers without access to the complete narrative. This textual gap created a peculiar situation where educated Europeans possessed theoretical knowledge about Plato's philosophical importance, while remaining largely ignorant of his specific teachings. Medieval encyclopedists like Isidore of Seville acknowledge Plato's significance in their comprehensive surveys of classical learning, yet their discussions necessarily relied on second-hand summaries rather than direct textual engagement. The Atlantis narrative, requiring access to the complete Timaeus and Critias dialogues, remained effectively unknown to medieval scholarship. The few references to lost civilizations that appeared in medieval literature typically derived from biblical or patristic sources rather than classical Greek philosophy. Medieval chroniclers showed considerable interest in antediluvian history and the fate of pre-Christian civilizations, but their investigations drew primarily from Genesis, the Book of Enoch, and early Christian historical works. When medieval writers speculated about ancient catastrophes or vanished peoples, they framed their discussions within biblical chronology and theological interpretation rather than Platonic philosophy. The Renaissance transformation of European intellectual culture began with the gradual recovery of classical Greek texts through contact with Byzantine scholars and the systematic exploration of monastic libraries. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 accelerated this process by forcing Greek scholars westward, carrying with them manuscript collections that had survived in Eastern libraries. Among these recovered texts were complete versions of Plato's dialogues, including the Timaeus and Critias that contain the full Atlantis narrative. Marsilio Ficino's monumental Latin translation of Plato's complete works, completed in Florence around 1484, marked the decisive moment in the Atlantis narrative's return to European consciousness. Ficino, working under the patronage of Cosimo de' Medici, approached his translation project with both scholarly rigor and philosophical enthusiasm that reflected the broader Renaissance engagement with classical antiquity. His translation made Platonic texts accessible to educated Europeans for the first time in nearly a millennium, creating the foundation for renewed scholarly engagement with the Atlantis story. Ficino's interpretive approach to the Atlantis narrative reflected his deep commitment to Neoplatonic philosophy and his belief in the fundamental compatibility between Platonic wisdom and Christian truth. Rather than viewing the story as either pure fiction or literal history, Ficino understood it as a complex allegorical framework that encoded profound truths about human nature and divine providence. His commentary emphasized the moral dimensions of the narrative, interpreting the rise and fall of Atlantis as an illustration of the eternal conflict between spiritual and material values. The Medici court's intellectual environment proved particularly receptive to the Atlantis narrative's themes of lost wisdom and ancient greatness. Renaissance humanists, acutely conscious of their own civilization's relationship to classical antiquity, found in the Atlantis story a powerful metaphor for the recovery and loss of cultural achievement. The parallel between their own efforts to recover classical learning and Plato's account of ancient wisdom preserved in Egyptian temples resonated strongly with humanist sensibilities. The printing revolution of the late 15th century dramatically expanded access to Ficino's Platonic translations, ensuring that the Atlantis narrative reached scholarly audiences throughout Europe. The 1491 Venetian edition, produced by Aldus Manutius, exemplified the new technology's capacity to disseminate classical texts with unprecedented speed and accuracy. Within decades, educated Europeans from London to Prague possessed access to complete versions of the Timaeus and Critias, ending the millennium-long absence of the Atlantis story from European intellectual discourse. The rediscovery of the Atlantis narrative coincided with the age of exploration's dramatic expansion of geographical knowledge, creating unprecedented opportunities for new interpretations of Plato's account. Columbus's voyages across the Atlantic Ocean, beginning in 1492, occurred within a decade of Ficino's translation project, establishing a remarkable chronological convergence between textual recovery and geographical exploration. This timing proved crucial for subsequent interpretations, as European scholars suddenly possessed both access to Plato's complete account and contemporary evidence of previously unknown lands beyond the Atlantic. The Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire provided particularly compelling material for Atlantis speculation. Hernán Cortés's letters describing Tenochtitlan's sophisticated urban planning, elaborate water management systems, and vast wealth immediately reminded educated Europeans of Plato's description of the Atlantean capital. The city's location on an island connected to the mainland by causeways, its complex system of canals and harbors, and its impressive architectural achievements all seemed to echo specific details from the Critias dialogue. Francisco López de Gómara's Historia General de las Indias, published in 1552, made explicit connections between the newly discovered American civilizations and Plato's Atlantis narrative. López de Gómara argued that the advanced indigenous cultures encountered by Spanish conquistadors provided concrete evidence that sophisticated civilizations had indeed existed in the Atlantic region, lending credibility to Plato's account. His interpretation suggested that the Atlantis story preserved genuine historical memories of pre-Columbian American civilizations, transmitted through Egyptian records and ultimately recorded by Plato. The geographical location of the Americas relative to the Mediterranean world also seemed to support Platonic accuracy. The positioning of the New World beyond the Strait of Gibraltar corresponded precisely to Plato's description of Atlantis as lying beyond the Pillars of Hercules. The vast size of the American continent matched Plato's claim that Atlantis had been larger than Libya and Asia combined, while the Atlantic Ocean's extent provided ample space for the additional territories that Plato attributed to Atlantean control. Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo's Magisterio General de las Indias offered a more systematic analysis of parallels between Platonic descriptions and American realities. Oviedo, who spent decades in the New World documenting indigenous cultures and natural phenomena, identified numerous specific correspondences between Plato's account and observed American characteristics. He noted similarities in metallurgical techniques, agricultural practices, and architectural styles that suggested possible historical connections between Plato's Atlantis and pre-Columbian civilizations. The discovery of advanced hydraulic engineering in various American cultures provided particularly striking parallels to Plato's description of Atlantean water management. The elaborate canal systems of the Aztec capital, the sophisticated irrigation networks of Andean civilizations, and the complex harbor facilities found at various coastal sites all demonstrated engineering capabilities that matched or exceeded those attributed to Atlantis. These technological parallels suggested to Renaissance observers that American civilizations possessed the advanced knowledge that would have been necessary to construct the elaborate infrastructure described in the Critias dialogue. As the night deepens and your breathing becomes slower, more regular, let us drift into the intellectual ferment of the 17th and 18th centuries, when the Enlightenment transformed European approaches to ancient texts and historical claims with unprecedented rigor. The scientific revolution's emphasis on empirical observation and systematic methodology created new frameworks for evaluating historical narratives. while expanding geographical knowledge provided fresh context for interpreting ancient accounts of distant lands. Within this transformed intellectual landscape, the Atlantis narrative encountered both vigorous scholarly investigation and increasingly sophisticated criticism. The Swedish scholar Olof Rudbeck emerged as perhaps the most ambitious and systematic proponent of Atlantis theories during this period. His monumental work, Atlantica, published in 4 volumes between 1679 and 1702, represented an extraordinary attempt to relocate Plato's lost civilization within the familiar geography of Scandinavia. Rudbeck, who held the chair of medicine at Uppsala University and possessed extensive knowledge of Nordic archaeology and linguistics, developed an elaborate theory identifying Sweden as the original Atlantis described by Plato. Rudbeck's identification of Sweden with Atlantis rested on a complex philological argument that traced the name Atlantis through various linguistic transformations to Atland, which he interpreted as an ancient designation for Swedish territory. He argued that classical authors had systematically misunderstood the geographical references in ancient sources, placing Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean when the original accounts actually referred to the Baltic Sea region. According to Rudbeck's reconstruction, the Pillars of Hercules, mentioned by Plato, did not refer to the Strait of Gibraltar, but rather to some northern geographical feature, possibly the narrow passages between Danish islands or the entrance to the Baltic Sea itself. The archaeological evidence that Rudbeck marshalled in support of his theory reflected the limited but growing knowledge of Scandinavian prehistory available in the late 17th century. He pointed to the numerous Bronze Age burial mounds scattered across the Swedish landscape as evidence of an ancient civilization of extraordinary sophistication and wealth. The elaborate grave goods discovered in these burials, including intricate metalwork and imported materials from distant regions, suggested to Rudbeck a level of cultural development and international trade connections that matched Plato's descriptions of Atlantean prosperity and influence. Rudbeck's linguistic analysis extended beyond simple etymological connections to encompass a comprehensive theory about the relationship between ancient Swedish and classical languages. He argued that many fundamental terms in Greek and Latin actually derived from Proto-Germanic roots preserved in Swedish, suggesting that Scandinavian civilization had provided the foundation for classical Mediterranean cultures rather than the reverse. This linguistic priority, according to Rudbeck, explained how ancient Swedish traditions about their own glorious past had eventually reached Egyptian priests and ultimately influenced Plato's account. The geographical features of Sweden and its surrounding regions provided Rudbeck with numerous parallels to Plato's description of Atlantis. The complex archipelago systems along Sweden's eastern coast, with their intricate patterns of islands, straits, and sheltered harbours, seem to echo the concentric rings of land and water that Plato attributed to the Atlantean capital. The extensive lake systems of central Sweden, connected by rivers and navigable waterways, offered a plausible model for the elaborate canal networks that Plato described as facilitating both transportation and irrigation throughout Atlantean territory. French scholars of the early 18th century developed alternative approaches to the Atlantis narrative that reflected their nation's growing involvement in global exploration and colonial expansion. The mathematician and geographer Philip Boissche proposed in 1737 that Atlantis had been located in the North Atlantic region, possibly corresponding to submerged landmasses between Europe and North America. Boische's theory drew on emerging oceanographic knowledge and geological speculation about past changes in sea level, representing an early attempt to apply scientific reasoning to the geographical aspects of Plato's account. Boische's cartographic work provided visual representation of his theories through detailed maps showing hypothetical Atlantic landmasses that might have existed in ancient times. His carte physique et politique de l'Atlantique depicted a series of islands and shallow areas that could plausibly have supported the large population and extensive territories that Plato attributed to Atlantis. The map incorporated contemporary knowledge about ocean depths and underwater topography while extrapolating possible ancient configurations based on geological theories about crustal movement and sea level change. The influence of emerging geological knowledge on Atlantis theories became increasingly significant throughout the 18th century, as scholars developed more sophisticated understanding of Earth's physical processes. The recognition that sea levels had changed dramatically over geological time provided a plausible mechanism for explaining how large landmasses might have disappeared beneath ocean waters. The discovery of marine fossils in mountain regions demonstrated that current geographical relationships between land and sea differed significantly from past configurations, lending credibility to claims about vanished continents. Voltaire's treatment of the Atlantis narrative in his essay on manners exemplified the Enlightenment's critical approach to ancient authorities and historical claims. Rather than accepting Plato's account at face value or attempting to identify specific geographical locations for Atlantis, Voltaire subjected the narrative to systematic rational analysis that revealed numerous internal inconsistencies and implausibilities. His critique focused particularly on the chronological problems posed by Plato's dating and the absence of corroborating evidence from other ancient sources. The methodological innovations of 18th century historiography provided new tools for evaluating ancient texts that fundamentally changed scholarly approaches to narratives like Atlantis. Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire demonstrated how careful source criticism and systematic comparison of different accounts could reveal the historical accuracy or inaccuracy of ancient claims. These methods, when applied to the Atlantis narrative, highlighted the unique character of Plato's account and its isolation from other ancient historical traditions. The expansion of European knowledge about Pacific Ocean geography through the voyages of James Cook and other explorers provided fresh contexts for interpreting ancient accounts of distant lands. The discovery of sophisticated Polynesian civilizations scattered across vast oceanic distances demonstrated that advanced cultures could indeed exist on remote islands, lending some credibility to claims about ancient Atlantic civilizations. However, the absence of any archaeological evidence for large-scale civilization in the Atlantic region contrasted sharply with the abundant material remains of Pacific Island cultures. German scholars of the mid-18th century developed increasingly sophisticated approaches to ancient mythology and historical narratives that influenced interpretations of the Atlantis story. Johann David Michaelis's work on biblical chronology and ancient Near Eastern history provided methodological frameworks for evaluating claims about ancient civilizations and their historical relationships. His emphasis on linguistic evidence and comparative cultural analysis offered alternatives to the purely geographical approaches that had dominated earlier Atlantis speculation. The emergence of systematic archaeology during the later 18th century began to provide concrete evidence about ancient civilizations that could be compared with Plato's descriptions of Atlantis. The excavation of Pompeii and Herculaneum revealed the material culture of ancient urban civilizations with unprecedented detail, allowing scholars to evaluate the plausibility of Plato's claims about Atlantean technology and social organization. The absence of archaeological evidence for comparably advanced ancient civilizations in Atlantic regions became increasingly problematic for theories supporting the historical accuracy of Plato's account. The publication of Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, in 1882 marked a seismic shift in how the Western world understood and interpreted Plato's ancient narrative. Ignatius Donnelly, a charismatic former congressman from Minnesota with no formal training in archaeology or ancient history, produced a work that would fundamentally reshape popular conceptions of human prehistory and establish enduring mythologies about lost civilizations that persist to this day. His 500-page tome, dense with citations, maps, and comparative analyses, presented itself as rigorous scholarship while advancing theories that professional archaeologists and historians found deeply problematic. Donnelly's background as a populist politician, rather than an academic scholar, profoundly influenced his approach to the Atlantis question. Born in Philadelphia in 1831, he had built his career on challenging established authorities and championing the common man against entrenched elites. His political experience in Minnesota, territorial politics, and his 3 terms in the US House of Representatives had honed his skills in persuasive rhetoric and popular communication. When he turned his attention to ancient history, he brought the same combative spirit and popular sensibilities that had characterized his political career, positioning himself as a truth-telling outsider, challenging the dogmas of academic establishments. The intellectual climate of the 1880s provided fertile ground for Donnelly's revolutionary claims about human prehistory. Charles Darwin's Origin of Species had fundamentally altered scientific understanding of human development, while archaeological discoveries across Europe, Egypt, and the Americas were revealing evidence of sophisticated ancient civilizations that challenged traditional biblical chronologies. The general public, educated enough to follow scientific developments but lacking specialized knowledge to evaluate competing claims, proved remarkably receptive to bold new theories that promised to explain mysterious archaeological phenomena and ancient myths within comprehensive theoretical frameworks. Donnelly's central thesis rested on the proposition that Plato's Atlantis had been a real historical civilization, whose destruction, approximately 11,000 years ago, had scattered survivors across the globe, carrying advanced knowledge and cultural practices that became the foundation for all subsequent human civilizations. This catastrophic dispersal, according to Donnelly, explained the remarkable similarities he claimed to observe between ancient cultures, separated by vast geographical distances. Rather than viewing these similarities as evidence of independent human development or later cultural contact, Donnelly argued they represented the fragmentary preservation of a common Atlantean heritage. The methodological approach that Donnelly employed in constructing his argument combined selective citation of legitimate archaeological and ethnographic sources with speculative interpretations that extended far beyond what the evidence could reasonably support. He demonstrated remarkable industry in gathering comparative material from diverse cultures, citing everything from Aztec creation myths to Egyptian pyramid construction techniques to Celtic folklore. However, his analysis consistently emphasized superficial similarities while ignoring fundamental differences, and he showed little concern for the chronological contexts that would have been essential for establishing actual historical connections. Donnelly's treatment of flood myths provided a representative example of his methodology. He compiled extensive lists of flood narratives from cultures around the world, noting apparent similarities in their descriptions of worldwide catastrophes that destroyed earlier civilizations. From these parallels, he argued that all flood myths preserve distorted memories of the actual destruction of Atlantis, transmitted through oral traditions by scattered survivors. This interpretation allowed him to treat diverse mythological traditions as corroborating historical evidence, while dismissing the obvious differences between various flood narratives as minor corruptions introduced during centuries of oral transmission. The linguistic evidence that Donnelly marshaled in support of his theories reflected both the strengths and weaknesses of 19th century comparative philology. He identified numerous words from different language families that appeared to share common roots, arguing that these similarities demonstrated descent from a common Atlantean linguistic ancestor. His etymological analyses ranged from plausible connections between related Indo-European languages to wildly speculative derivations that linked unrelated linguistic families through chains of hypothetical sound changes. Professional linguists recognized that Donnelly's methods could be used to prove virtually any desired linguistic relationship, making his conclusions essentially meaningless from a scholarly perspective. The architectural parallels that formed another pillar of Donnelly's argument drew on the growing body of archaeological knowledge about ancient construction techniques and monumental buildings. He noted that cultures as diverse as the ancient Egyptians, Mesoamerican civilizations, and various European megalithic builders had all constructed massive stone structures using sophisticated engineering techniques. These similarities, according to Donnelly, could only be explained by assuming that all these cultures had inherited their architectural knowledge from Atlantean colonists who had escaped the Great Catastrophe. The influence of Donnelly's work on popular consciousness proved immediate and profound, transforming Atlantis from an obscure philosophical dialogue into a central reference point for discussions about human prehistory and lost civilizations. The book's commercial success was extraordinary for a work of scholarship. Going through multiple editions and translations that brought Donnelly's theories to readers across Europe and America, public lectures based on the book drew large audiences eager to hear about the dramatic revelations that promised to revolutionize understanding of human history. Let your mind drift now toward the mystical and esoteric interpretations that would follow in Donnelly's wake, transforming Atlantis from a subject of archaeological speculation into a cornerstone of spiritual teaching and occult doctrine. The transformation began with Helena Petrovna Blavatsky's ambitious synthesis of Eastern philosophy, Western esotericism, and speculative anthropology in the 1880s. Blavatsky, a Russian aristocrat turned spiritual teacher, possessed an extraordinary talent for weaving together disparate religious and philosophical traditions into comprehensive cosmological systems that promised to reveal hidden truths about human spiritual evolution. Her monumental work, The Secret Doctrine, published in 1888, elevated Atlantis from a lost civilization into a crucial stage in humanity's cosmic development, establishing interpretive frameworks that would influence esoteric thought for more than a century. Blavatsky's approach to Atlantis differed fundamentally from Donnelly's archaeological methodology, drawing instead on claimed access to ancient wisdom preserved in Tibetan monasteries and transmitted through psychic revelation. She asserted that her teachings derived from the Akashic Records, a cosmic repository of all human experience accessible through advanced spiritual development, and from direct communication with Mahatmas, ascended masters who guided human evolution from hidden retreats in the Himalayas. The doctrine of root races formed the theoretical foundation of Blavatsky's Atlantis teachings, providing a framework that connected individual spiritual development with cosmic evolutionary cycles. According to theosophical cosmology, humanity progressed through 7 distinct root races, each representing a different stage of physical and spiritual evolution occurring over millions of years. The 4th root race, known as the Atlanteans, had inhabited the Earth during a period when the planet's geography, climate, and spiritual conditions differed dramatically from contemporary circumstances. These beings possessed physical and psychic capabilities that modern humans had largely lost, representing both an evolutionary peak and a cautionary example of spiritual failure. The Atlantean root race, as described in theosophical literature, encompassed several subraces that developed different characteristics and capabilities over millions of years. The earliest Atlanteans were giants possessing natural psychic powers, direct communion with spiritual hierarchies, and technological capabilities that operated through spiritual rather than mechanical principles. Their civilization reached heights of material and spiritual achievement that surpassed anything known to recorded history. With cities of crystalline beauty, flying vehicles powered by spiritual energy, and social systems based on direct psychic communication between individuals and governing councils. Blavatsky's description of Atlantean technology emphasized its integration with spiritual principles rather than mechanical engineering. The Atlanteans supposedly powered their vehicles and machinery through manipulation of subtle energies that modern science had not yet discovered, using crystals and sound vibrations to achieve effects that contemporary technology accomplished through crude mechanical means. The social organization of Atlantean civilization, according to theosophical teachings, reflected the advanced spiritual development of its inhabitants during the race's early periods. Natural psychic abilities eliminated the need for complex governmental bureaucracies, as individuals could communicate directly with qualified leaders and participate in collective decision-making through telepathic consensus. The absence of deception and hidden motives in a psychically transparent society created social harmony that modern civilizations dependent on external laws and enforcement mechanisms could barely comprehend. The decline and destruction of Atlantean civilization provided Blavatsky with a powerful illustration of the consequences of spiritual degeneracy and the misuse of occult knowledge. As the root race progressed through its evolutionary cycle, later generations gradually lost their natural spiritual abilities while retaining dangerous technological capabilities. The integration of spiritual and material power that had characterized early Atlantean civilization gave way to the separation of these domains, with a priestly class hoarding occult knowledge, while political leaders pursued material ambitions divorced from spiritual wisdom. The practice of black magic emerged during Atlantis' declining period as individuals and groups began using spiritual knowledge for selfish purposes rather than cosmic service. The same psychic abilities and energy manipulation techniques that had created Atlantean civilization's golden age became tools for personal aggrandizement and the domination of others. Secret societies developed within Atlantean society, preserving dangerous occult practices while corrupting the spiritual teachings that had originally guided the race's development. The final destruction of Atlantis occurred through a combination of natural catastrophes and the consequences of spiritual corruption. According to theosophical accounts, the misuse of spiritual forces had disrupted the subtle energy patterns maintaining the continent's physical stability, while the accumulation of negative karma from black magic practices had attracted destructive cosmic influences. The great cataclysm that sank Atlantis beneath the ocean represented both a natural geological process and a spiritual cleansing that removed a corrupted civilization whose continued existence would have hindered planetary evolution. Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophical interpretation of Atlantis built upon theosophical foundations, while developing distinctive approaches to spiritual evolution and human development that reflected his background in German idealist philosophy and his personal clairvoyant investigations. Steiner, who had initially been associated with the Theosophical Society before founding his own Anthroposophical Society in 1913, claimed direct spiritual perception of Atlantean civilization through developed supersensible faculties that allowed him to investigate past evolutionary periods with scientific precision. Steiner's account of Atlantean civilization emphasized the fundamental differences between ancient and modern consciousness that made direct comparison between these periods problematic. According to anthroposophical teachings, the Atlanteans possessed a dreamlike consciousness that provided direct access to spiritual realities, but lacked the sharp intellectual discrimination that characterized post-Atlantean thinking. Their perception of the physical world remained fluid and malleable, allowing them to work with natural forces in ways that modern consciousness, fixed in rigid conceptual frameworks, could no longer achieve. The educational methods employed in Atlantean civilization reflected their different relationship to knowledge and learning. According to Steiner's investigations, rather than acquiring information through external instruction, Atlanteans developed their capabilities through direct participation in cosmic processes, guided by advanced teachers who possessed full spiritual vision. The development of individual faculties occurred through graduated exposure to spiritual influences that awakened dormant capacities, rather than through the accumulation of conceptual knowledge that characterizes later educational approaches. The agricultural and technological practices of the Atlanteans operated through their ability to work directly with the life forces animating plants, animals, and natural processes. They could stimulate plant growth, direct animal behavior, and manipulate weather patterns through spiritual influence rather than mechanical intervention. Their tools and machines functioned as extensions of human will and spiritual energy, rather than as independent mechanical devices, creating a technology that was simultaneously more advanced and more harmoniously integrated with natural processes than modern industrial methods. Edgar Cayce's psychic readings about Atlantis, delivered during trance states between 1923 and 1944, provided the most detailed and influential modern account of the lost civilization, while establishing interpretive frameworks that would dominate New Age approaches to ancient mysteries. Cayce, a photographer from Kentucky with no formal education in history or archaeology, claimed to access information about past lives and historical events through psychic means while in an unconscious state. His 14,000 documented readings included over 700 references to Atlantis, creating a comprehensive narrative that combined theosophical concepts with distinctive American metaphysical traditions. The Atlantean civilization described in Casey's readings spanned a period from approximately 200,000 to 10,000 BC, encompassing multiple technological and spiritual developments that occurred over vast time periods. According to these psychic revelations, Atlantis had experienced three major periods of destruction caused by the misuse of advanced technology, with the final cataclysm around 10,500 BC, completely submerging the continent beneath the Atlantic Ocean. The survivors of these destructions had migrated to various parts of the world, carrying Atlantean knowledge and establishing the foundations for ancient Egyptian, Mayan, and other advanced civilizations. The technology attributed to Atlantis in Casey's readings centered on the use of crystals for generating and focusing various forms of energy that could power vehicles, provide illumination, and facilitate long-distance communication. The Great Crystal that served as the primary power source for Atlantean civilization was described as a massive stone capable of concentrating solar and cosmic energies for practical applications. The misuse of this crystal technology by later generations who turned it toward destructive purposes and personal aggrandizement ultimately caused the geological instabilities that led to the continent's destruction. The social organization of Atlantis, according to Casey's readings, involved a complex mixture of highly advanced spiritual beings and more primitive human types who coexisted in relationships that sometimes created conflict and exploitation. The Sons of the Law of One represented the spiritually advanced faction that sought to use Atlantean technology for constructive purposes and the elevation of all consciousness, while the Sons of Belial pursued selfish material goals and the exploitation of less developed beings for personal benefit. The increasing dominance of the Sons of Belial during Atlantis' later periods created the spiritual conditions that attracted the final catastrophic destruction. As your breathing becomes even slower, even more regular, let us drift toward the scientific investigations and archaeological discoveries that would ultimately challenge these mystical interpretations, while revealing genuine ancient civilizations that bore some resemblance to aspects of the Atlantis legend. The systematic application of modern scientific methodology to Atlantis claims began in earnest during the early 20th century as professional archaeology established rigorous standards for evidence evaluation and peer review processes that would fundamentally challenge the speculative theories that had flourished during the Victorian era. The archaeological investigation of Mediterranean Bronze Age civilizations during the first half of the 20th century produced discoveries that initially seemed to support some aspects of Atlantis theories, while ultimately demonstrating the dangers of superficial historical parallels. The excavation of Minoan palaces on Crete by Sir Arthur Evans beginning in 1900 revealed a sophisticated civilization that had flourished during the second millennium BC, possessing advanced hydraulic engineering, elaborate artistic traditions, and extensive maritime trade networks that connected the Aegean world with Egypt, Anatolia, and the Western Mediterranean. The sudden collapse of Minoan civilization around 1450 BC, apparently caused by natural disasters combined with foreign invasion, provided a historical precedent for the kind of catastrophic civilizational destruction described in Plato's account. Evans himself initially drew explicit parallels between Minoan Crete and Plato's Atlantis, noting similarities in their island locations, maritime orientations, advanced technologies, and sudden destruction. The Minoan palaces at Knossos and Phaistos featured elaborate water management systems, including indoor plumbing, drainage networks, and decorative fountains that seemed to echo Plato's descriptions of Atlantean hydraulic engineering. The extensive storage facilities for oil, wine, and grain suggested the kind of agricultural abundance that Plato attributed to Atlantis, while the evidence for long-distance trade in luxury goods indicated the wealth and international connections that formed the Atlantean capital. The artistic representations found in Minoan palaces provided additional apparent parallels to Atlantean themes, including frescoes depicting bull-leaping ceremonies that seemed to correspond to Plato's account of ritual bull sacrifice in the Temple of Poseidon. the prominent role of maritime imagery in Minoan art, from dolphin frescoes to ship representations, reinforced the connection to Plato's emphasis on Atlantean naval power and oceanic orientation. However, as archaeological investigation of Minoan civilization progressed and more sophisticated analytical methods were applied, the apparent parallels to Atlantis began to dissolve under closer scrutiny. The chronological framework established through pottery analysis and radiocarbon dating placed Minoan civilization firmly within the 2nd millennium BC, far removed from the 9500 BC date that Plato had specified for Atlantis. The geographical scale of Minoan influence, while impressive for its time period, remained limited to the eastern Mediterranean region, rather than encompassing the global empire that Plato attributed to Atlantis. The discovery of the Therovolcanic eruption around 1600 BC created a massive tsunami that devastated coastal areas throughout the eastern Mediterranean, providing a plausible natural disaster that could have inspired later accounts of sudden civilizational destruction. The archaeological excavations at Akrotiri on Santorini revealed a remarkably preserved Bronze Age city buried beneath volcanic ash, offering dramatic evidence of the catastrophic eruption that had devastated the region. The Akrotiri excavations revealed a sophisticated urban civilization with multi-story buildings, advanced drainage systems, and elaborate frescoes depicting maritime scenes and exotic animals. The sudden abandonment of the city, with valuable objects left in place and no evidence of looting or gradual decline, suggested that the inhabitants had fled quickly in the face of volcanic warning signs before the final catastrophic eruption. The scale of the Santorini eruption, estimated to have been 4 times larger than the 1883 Krakatoa explosion, would have generated massive tsunamis capable of devastating coastal settlements throughout the eastern Mediterranean. This catastrophic destruction of Minoan civilization provided a historical foundation that some researchers argued could have reached Plato through Egyptian records, becoming transformed in the telling into the Atlantis narrative. Yet even as these Bronze Age discoveries provided possible historical inspirations for the Atlantis legend, the systematic survey of the Atlantic Ocean floor conducted by various oceanographic institutions during the second half of the 20th century produced definitive evidence against the existence of any recently submerged continental landmass in the Atlantic. These surveys demonstrated that the Atlantic Ocean floor consisted primarily of abyssal plains, lying at depths of 3,000 to 4,000 meters below sea level, with no evidence of recently submerged continental landmasses that could have supported large-scale civilization during the time period suggested by various Atlantis theories. The geological analysis of Atlantic Ocean sediment cores provided additional evidence against the existence of any large landmass in the Atlantic during the periods when Atlantis was supposed to have existed. The sediment layers revealed a consistent pattern of deep ocean deposition extending back millions of years, with no indication of the dramatic geological changes that would have been necessary to submerge a continent-sized landmass within the last 12,000 years. The absence of terrestrial sediments, pollen, or other indicators of nearby land surfaces in the deep Atlantic contradicted claims about recently submerged civilizations. The search for Atlantean ruins in the Caribbean region, inspired by Edgar Cayce's psychic readings and various other alternative theories, produced numerous claims about underwater structures that initially seemed to support the existence of advanced ancient civilizations in Atlantic waters. The Bimini Road Formation off the Bahamas, first publicized in 1968, consisted of rectangular stone blocks arranged in linear patterns on the ocean floor that some researchers interpreted as the remains of ancient roadways or building foundations. The geometric regularity of these formations and their apparent artificial construction suggested to some investigators that they represented archaeological evidence of pre-Columbian civilization in the region. However, detailed geological analysis of the Bimini Road Formation revealed that the rectangular blocks consisted of naturally fractured limestone that had broken along regular joint patterns due to geological stress and chemical weathering processes. The linear arrangement of the blocks resulted from natural geological processes rather than human construction. While the apparent artificial appearance reflected the tendency of limestone to fracture along regular geometric patterns when subjected to particular combinations of geological forces. The dating of the limestone formation placed its origin millions of years before any possible human presence in the region. The transformation of Atlantis from Plato's philosophical allegory into a global cultural phenomenon reached its culmination in modern popular culture, where the lost civilization became a standard setting for adventure fiction, visual spectacle, and imaginative exploration. Jules Verne's groundbreaking novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, published in 1870, established visual and narrative conventions that would influence popular depictions for more than a century. Verne's vivid description of Captain Nemo's underwater encounter with the ruins of Atlantis captured Victorian imagination with unprecedented force, presenting Atlantis as a tangible archaeological reality complete with crumbling temples, fallen statues, and the detritus of a once great civilization, preserved beneath the ocean's protective embrace. The literary impact of Verne's Atlantis extended far beyond the specific scene in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea to establish a template for adventure fiction that combined exotic locations, advanced technology, and archaeological mystery. His approach influenced subsequent generations of adventure writers who adopted similar formulas of lost civilizations discovered through technological means, creating a subgenre that would eventually encompass everything from Edgar Rice Burroughs' Pellucidar novels to modern techno-thrillers featuring underwater exploration and ancient secrets. The emergence of comic books, films, and television during the 20th century provided new venues for Atlantis-themed entertainment, while establishing visual conventions that would shape popular imagination about how the lost civilization might have appeared. DC Comics' Aquaman, first appearing in 1941, presented Atlantis as a thriving underwater kingdom whose inhabitants had adapted to marine life while retaining advanced technology and sophisticated social organization. Marvel Comics' treatment of Atlantis through the character of Namor the Submariner offered a more complex and morally ambiguous interpretation that reflected contemporary concerns about environmentalism and cultural conflict. The influence of video games on Atlantis imagery became increasingly significant as gaming technology advanced to support complex three-dimensional environments and detailed character modeling. Games featuring extensive underwater exploration sequences and ancient ruins drew upon established Atlantis visual conventions while allowing players to interact directly with these environments. The interactive nature of gaming created opportunities for more detailed exploration of Atlantean architecture and technology than passive media could provide, leading to increasingly elaborate and internally consistent depictions of the lost civilization. The enduring legacy of Plato's Atlantis ultimately transcends questions about its historical accuracy to encompass fundamental issues about human nature, social organization, and the relationship between material progress and moral development. Whether interpreted as philosophical allegory, historical account, or modern mythology, the Atlantis narrative continues to provide frameworks for exploring these eternal questions, while adapting to contemporary circumstances and concerns. Its persistence across diverse cultural contexts and historical periods demonstrates the power of well-crafted narratives to capture human imagination and provide meaning in ways that purely factual accounts cannot achieve. The phenomenon of Atlantis reveals both the strengths and limitations of human pattern-seeking behavior, showing how the same cognitive processes that enable scientific discovery and cultural innovation can also generate elaborate misconceptions and resistant belief systems. Understanding why Atlantis persists in human imagination requires acknowledging both its positive functions as a source of wonder, inspiration, and community, and its problematic aspects as a vehicle for pseudoscientific thinking and conspiracy theories. As humanity faces unprecedented global challenges requiring both technological innovation and wisdom about the consequences of our choices, the Atlantis story remains relevant as a cautionary tale about the relationship between power and responsibility. Whether the lost civilization existed as Plato described, served as metaphor for political corruption, or functions as modern mythology about human potential. Its central message about the dangers of moral decline and the fragility of civilizational achievement speaks directly to contemporary concerns about sustainability, justice, and the future of human civilization. In this sense, Atlantis continues to serve its original purpose as a teaching tool for understanding the eternal challenges of human society, ensuring its place in human imagination for generations to come. The story reminds us that civilizations, no matter how advanced, how powerful, how prosperous, remain vulnerable to the consequences of their choices. That wisdom and virtue matter more than wealth and military might. That the arc of history bends not inevitably toward progress, but follows the moral character of those who shape it. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, let the story of Atlantis wash over you like gentle waves, not as a puzzle demanding solution, but as a meditation on the eternal themes of human aspiration and human fallibility. Whether beneath the Atlantic Ocean or the Aegean Sea, in ancient memory or philosophical imagination, Atlantis exists most truly in that space between waking and sleeping, between history and myth, where the deepest truths about human nature reveal themselves not through archaeological evidence, but through the timeless power of story. The concentric circles of land and water dissolve into the patterns of your breathing. The gleaming metallic walls fade into the darkness behind your closed eyes, and the voices of Egyptian priests and Greek philosophers blend into the white noise of ocean waves. Sleep now, knowing that the search for Atlantis was never really about finding a lost continent, but about understanding ourselves, our civilizations, and the choices that determine whether we rise or fall, whether we endure or vanish like morning mist over ancient seas. If you enjoyed this journey through the story of Atlantis, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more long-form sleep stories that explore the mysteries and wonders of human history and imagination. Sweet dreams, and may you wake refreshed and renewed, carrying with you the timeless lessons whispered by the waves that once, perhaps, lapped against the shores of a civilization that existed somewhere between reality and dream, ality and dream.